because we're now getting to the part of the book, which is right at the end, chapter 23, Transformational Ownership. My book is Thriving at Nature's Pace. I'm Dr. David Coe. This is my mum, Eleanor. She's 91. We started this in probably December or maybe January. I don't know. We have to check. And my mum was saying, "Oh, you got a new book, Thriving at Nature's Pace. What's it about?" So I thought, why don't we read it together? And then I thought, why don't we read it and stream it and see what it is? Because then you'll have a record of me reading it, and then people can join, and I can share it, and so on. So anyway, we're getting towards the end. This chapter, Transformational Ownership, was the original idea towards what we can do with oil and gas and coal. And that was the idea that these companies should have a different sort of ownership. And that ownership is that they should be globally owned by people, everyone. Not by governments, not by private groups as such, but essentially by people. And by transforming that ownership, then it's everybody's choice as to what they do with the oil and gas and coal. And then the aspect came through as how you might do that. And there are all sorts of issues with changing ownership and things, and we'll go into some of these later. The idea of transformational ownership, I think, is still valid, it's still necessary, but maybe not at this moment, but something for the next generation to achieve, perhaps. But then came into the actual oil and gas and coal, and how we can have ownership of those materials instead, and that led to the idea of Thrive Coins and Thrive Contracts. So that's kind of the history of the idea in this way. It's been 6 years. We started back in COVID, 2020, November. So the best part of 6 years is a surprising long time. It's come full circle now, even in this chapter, Transformational Ownership, Thriving at Nature's Pace. And this came from my other book, The Unsustainable Truth. So, actually, that can get started. Transformational Ownership. Resources are meant to be exploited. This allows them to be privately owned by individuals, businesses, and communities. This turns them into investment assets. They can then be used for profits, and the more they are used, the more profits they can make for their owners. It therefore makes sense for owners to use investment assets to exhaustion. This is why oil, gas, and coal can no longer be considered as investment assets. Every time oil, gas, and coal are used, they create harm through climate change. This happens even when they bring benefits. The harm they create is also global. They harm people far remote from where they are used, so nobody can keep themselves safe. Their harmful effects also persist for hundreds of years, so even generations of people who are not yet born are harmed. However, it's hard to change their classification from being investment assets because there is no other category to place them into. This opens up the question of how such materials should be managed. International treaties have failed, the UNFCCC and the associated efforts have not worked. A significant reason is that climate change is scientifically linked to the greenhouse gases they produce and not to these materials themselves. This creates a false distinction. It allows those who want to continue to exploit oil, gas, and coal to claim that it is the emissions and not the materials that are responsible. It is like saying it's the smoke and not the cigarette that's responsible for cancer, or that it's the poison and not the factory that discharges it that is responsible for the tragedy that follows. The owners of oil, gas, and coal use this distinction to sidestep their responsibility. Since nobody owns the emissions, it leaves the classification of the assets unchanged. The result is they stay in the minds of people as investments, and that allows them to be used till they are exhausted. What then can be done? Transformational ownership is a radical rethinking of ownership of companies that modern society cannot live without and yet cannot live with. Most of the current owners of oil, gas, and coal are governments. This makes the idea of having governments be responsible pointless. If governments are already the majority owners of the production companies, and most of these governments, if not all, are adamant in claiming their right to use the oil and gas and coal in their control to exhaustion, then more government control is clearly not the answer. The big oil companies also do not represent an acceptable governance. They are increasingly focused on continuing extraction and use. They answer to their shareholders, and those shareholders who believe that oil, gas, and coal should not be used have largely divested. The new shareholders who replace them intend for these materials to be used to exhaustion. Furthermore, as publicly traded companies, their business model is to continue their use by exploring all yet unidentified reserves until all of them have been exhausted. This therefore leads to a governance model that is also not the answer. Regulations, legislation, and international treaties have all failed to exert sensible control. This is because of the distinction made between emissions and the cause of the emissions. The statement that it is greenhouse gases that cause climate change may be factually correct, but it hides the truth that those greenhouse gases are uniquely the consequence of using oil and gas and coal. However, regulations focus on the emissions, and in doing so allow the oil, gas, and coal which cause the emissions to freely continue. To change them requires governments. Governments are conflicted in their intent to use all the reserves they each have before imposing any constraint. Regulations are therefore likewise not the answer. That leaves a need for a more radical solution. If the ownership and categorization of oil, gas, and coal cannot be changed, it is possible to change the function of the oil, gas, and coal companies to produce Thrive contracts instead of oil, gas, and coal. For the companies, the more Thrive contracts they sell, Thrive contracts incidentally are contracts on the ownership of the oil and gas and coal, a barrel at a time, the more money they will make. They will also make money from managing the Thrive contracts themselves. This will change the profit motivation. They can be equally profitable no matter whether oil, gas, and coal are extracted or whether they are not extracted. It is now people who have the control over whether the oil and gas and coal are used to exhaustion or not. If companies themselves do not consider such change, then it's possible to buy out the companies to transform the ownership. That would be transformational ownership. So let's see how much more. So, what prevents oil, gas, and coal companies from engaging with Thrive contracts? Thrive contracts naturally benefit oil, gas, and coal production companies. However, on a climate change level, Thrive contracts are only meaningful if they bring an end to the use of oil and gas and coal before the deposits of these materials are exhausted. This perspective may stop existing owners and managers from engaging. Their current incentives are centered on the long-term profits they can make out of extracting oil and gas and coal. This is a short-sighted perspective. The timeline for climate change to damage the economy is now. This is significantly shorter than the timeline of the end of the century that scientists use to describe what may happen to the physical environment. The devastations are happening. Every country is losing days of productivity and dealing with unaffordable costs. Economic slowdown is the greatest threat to the oil and gas and coal industry. However, the economic incentive for the public oil, gas, and coal companies is to stay attractive as an investment opportunity. This means that when an investor buys a share of the company, the investor does not need to think about how many more years of coal and oil and gas production there will be left. The company ensures this by continuing to search for new discoveries to replenish the depletion of their existing oil, gas, and coal stock. This way, it stays in control of its long-term production horizon. Thrive contracts threaten this picture by putting the production horizon into the hands of people, businesses, and communities. The result is that even if discoveries are made, the long-term production horizon may still be reduced. For the shareholders, this hurts them. It reduces the potential value of the companies. For the management teams, it hurts them also through their personal wealth exposure to the shares and options on the companies. For privately owned companies, the situation is a little different. These tend to be smaller companies exploiting limited reserves. The owners know there's a date with destiny for the company. This can make them more interested in alternative opportunities to develop their business. They are more likely to see potential in Thrive contracts. For national companies, the issue is money to keep the government with its budgets. For example, Kenya is a leading African country and home to the UN Environment Programme. It hosted the first African Climate Summit in 2023. its population is suffering from the impact of climate change. It understands the economic and human costs of using oil and gas and coal and worsening climate change. And yet, it is bringing new oil and gas production online. It is doing this for the revenues to support its national budget. The money from the budget covers imports of fuel and food. Even though a country may produce oil, it often does not have the refining capability to turn the oil into fuel that can be used. That makes it dependent on a source of US dollars, since food and fuel are most often traded in US dollars. Most poorer countries have no means to receive US dollars except by selling minerals. That makes them prisoners to continuing to produce oil, gas, and coal. For national oil and gas companies, even if the price drops below where it is economical to produce, production still continues in order to provide revenues to the government at a loss to the companies. This means that for the national companies, the interest is again in prolonging the life of the oil and gas and coal. However, Thrive contracts provide opportunities for governments to have new money come to them. There is a balance of the day-to-day needs. This can be met by continuing existing production. Then the money that comes from Thrive contracts can build the new economy to be the future source of dollar revenues they need. This is the reality of the current situation. Some owners are incentivized for personal financial benefits to keep the longevity of oil, gas, and coal increasing. Others are restricted by the revenues they receive. Then there are others still that may be open to the opportunities afforded by Thrive contracts. So I think we'll pause there for today. Yeah. So we go back and then it'll be quite exciting. We're coming to an end. So okay, thank you for everybody.
Thank you.
So you take care, have a good day. God bless.
Love you, go to
Yeah. 我哋要夠鐘走。